Welcome to AskPsychSessions with Marianne Lloyd, where we ask some of the best teachers we know questions from you, our audience. If you have a question or an idea for a conversation, please visit bit.ly/AskPsychSessions. That's bit.ly/AskPsychSessions. All one word, all lowercase. And here's our next question.
Thanks for joining us. Today, my guest is Dr. Ana Blankson from Spelman College. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
I wanted to have you on the podcast today because I would like to talk about teaching, like we always do. So before I jump into my questions, would you mind telling the listeners a little bit about your training background and what you teach at Spelman, and maybe even a little bit about Spelman for our listeners that aren't familiar with your institution?
Yes, of course. So I am currently a full professor at Spelman College, which is located in Atlanta, Georgia. I received my PhD in quantitative psychology from the University of Southern California. And just a little bit of background of how I got into quantitative psychology is that I was interested in spending time in graduate school learning more about statistics and data analysis so that I could apply it to my own research interests. And at the time I had developmental research interests. And so I thought that it would be valuable to have somebody teaching me the statistics so then I could then do my own analyses. And I was mentored by Dr. John Horn, who was an expert in intelligence. And you might be familiar with the theory of fluid and crystallized intelligence. And, that's partly from Dr. Horn. And so he was an expert in that as well as quantitative methods. And so I got excellent training in various methods at the University of Southern California. And then after the University of Southern California, I had a postdoc at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, where I focused on honing my skills in early child development. And so there, the focus was on understanding cognition and emotion in preschoolers and how that affects them in their development. And my current research focuses on academic achievement in African American children. And so it brings in all of the things that I did in graduate school and then my postdoc. And so at Spelman, I'm the director of the Cognition and Temperament Lab, where one of the projects, as I mentioned, is focused on examining academic achievement in African American children. And I'm also currently the director of the Inspire You 2 summer program, which is funded by National Science Foundation. And that focuses on increase in statistical preparation in research education for underrepresented undergraduates. And so that program will run for the first time this summer, 2021, because of cancellation due to COVID last year. But that's a really exciting program. And I'm also a director of the RISE program at Spelman. And RISE focuses on training students in pursuing PhDs in the biomedical sciences. And so throughout all of these different hats that I wear, statistics runs through all of them. And I also, at Spelman, I teach statistics classes. And so that's a little bit about me.
Great. Thank you. I imagine many of our listeners are either teaching statistics or courses like research methods or capstone classes. And I was hoping you might have some ideas to have those go even better, maybe, than they are right now. So let's start a little bit broad. when you are teaching, say, an intro stats class, psych majors, what approach are you even taking right now? Are they doing hand calculations, Excel, learning to program in R, Jamovi, JASP? Does this partly depend on sort of who your students are and what they tend to be doing going into the workforce versus graduate programs? Just tell us a little bit about how you approach a statistics course, please.
Well, that's a great question. I should talk a little bit about Spelman for those who don't know. It's a small, historically Black liberal arts college for women in Atlanta, Georgia. And the psychology department in particular, our approach to statistics and research methods is that we have a 3-semester sequence that students must take. And so the first course in that sequence would be Statistics 1, and then after that, students take research methods, and then they're required to take an advanced measurement course. And that could be Statistics 2, that focuses more on multivariate analyses. And we also have psychometrics, and that's taught like a statistics course in which students learn more about how to develop psychological tests, how to test for reliability, how to test for validity. And then we also have a newer class that is being developed and taught that focuses on data science. And so students have different options when they take the advanced measurement courses. And so for me and for us at Spelman, when we're teaching the intro stats class, part of that approach depends on what students are going to do with that knowledge after. So since we know that our students are taking that class and then they'll take psychometrics or the advanced statistics, we, ensure that we prepare them for those advanced classes. But depending on, the institution, it might be that some students are only taking that intro statistics class and they don't take anything else, unless if they go to graduate school, or that's the only class that student will ever take in statistics. And so it's important that we understand who we're teaching and why we're teaching them before jumping into various topics. And so it's important to know who your students are, what they're going to do with that information. What outcome do you want to have for the students in that class, and why? So if you know that your students are only taking this statistics class and they'll never take another statistics class, or that most of your students are not going to go on to graduate school, then you might approach that course differently from a course where you know that students are going to take another level, or a course where your students are going to go on to graduate school. So if it's a course that students are, regardless of the, what students will do in the future with that course, we also want to connect the course to students' interests and their current lives and help them to see the importance of statistics in general. For me, I think that a statistics class should be required for all people, because there's so much of our lives that where we are consumers of statistical information. So those are just a few points to keep in mind as you are shaping your class. There's so much with our lives, if we think about even this coronavirus and COVID that's happening. One of the early things that we heard about was flattening the curve. Well, people don't know what that curve is. How can they understand why we need to flatten it? What does flattening mean? How we're going to flatten it? And some of those things are, basic to statistics.
All right, great. So that's a good framing, right? You really need to think about, I often think I'm not building a bunch of new me's. They're probably not going to go become cognitive psychologists, but what are they going to do and what would help them do that more effectively? So thank you. And I hear that you're not promoting a specific product either, so we can have some flexibility there. If you're up for it, would you be willing to talk a little bit about if you experience some statistics, reluctance or anxiety or uncertainty? I sometimes say that stats is a good class to teach because students often walk in not being excited. So if it goes better than that, you're winning. You've moved up the scale. Is that similar to your experience? And what do you do about it?
Oh, yes. Many students enter statistics with fear, because of their fears of math. And I think some of these fears are often unfounded, but, and this is especially true for women and for Black women. And, at Spelman, my students are Black women. And so I approach the class with that knowledge that a lot of my students are going to come in. Like, I really don't want to take this class. I'm not going to do well. I'm afraid of math. And so with that knowledge, I can, try to help break down some of these stereotypes that, have been formed around statistics. And so it's important to let students know that anxiety itself can be a stumbling block for learning. And with regard to statistics, the attitudes that students have when they enter the course, it can affect how well they do. And I try to communicate that to the students. Of course, that's easier said than done. Like, go change your attitude. That's not that easy. But as I'm teaching, I allow students to see the things that they already know. And by pointing out the things that students already know, that can help them to develop more of a sense of their own learning and provide them with something to build on. I've had many students who at the end of the semester, they tell me that, I thought this class was going to be hard because I don't like math, but it wasn't hard. And I actually like statistics. And so part of that too, when you break things down, into basic principles. Now, to be able to do that sometimes that comes with us professors all developing a level of understanding of what we're teaching so that we can break it down. Now, not all stats professors are quantitative psychologists. Some are teaching it from their knowledge of applying the statistics. And so when we acknowledge maybe our own limitations in our knowledge and we develop and strengthen our own knowledge, then maybe we can break things down a little bit better for the students and help the students to connect the dots. So if we're talking about one concept and then we talk about a different concept, helping students to connect the dots is important. And the more we're able to do that, I think the more we can reduce the anxiety of students. And with statistics, there's so many terms and concepts for which we have various words for those same concepts. And sometimes in a class, an instructor might use those different words and not explain to the students that those things mean the same thing. Mm-hmm. So when we are more aware of our own knowledge, then it can help to, break things down for the students. So it's important when we use those different terms, let students know these words are the same thing. And even like with the textbooks that we're using, maybe we're using a term that the textbook's not using, but it's the same thing. Helping students to connect the dots can really help them to alleviate that anxiety and also tying in what we're talking about to students' interests. the more we connect ideas to the things that students are interested in, that can also help with increasing students' own interest in statistics. And part of the way that I do that is the classes that I teach are project-based. And so students work on their own projects. They come up with their own research questions. And so they're taking ownership of their own learning, and they're doing something that they're interested in. I'm not telling them, you should do analyses on this topic because that's how you're going to learn how to do an analysis of variance. Instead, the students are coming up with their own questions, and then they're saying, okay, for this question, this is the type of analysis that I should do. And then that can help to connect the dots. And anxiety with statistics is something that is there. And the more we recognize that it's there and help students to overcome the anxiety, the more we'll see students developing that liking for statistics.
There's so many good things you just said. I was trying to scribble wildly. But I really want to echo. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for being so sharing. The one that I'm really kind of stuck on my head is this not remembering the distance between the way we understand things and the way the students, and how the first time you're learning something, how hard it is to see how it connects to other spaces, and being just really explicit is super important. So thank you for the idea of project learning and remembering their interests, but that idea of making sure that I remember this is fresh for them is really critical. And it's maybe a good reminder. Sometimes I try to learn something new during the semester to remember that feels like. So I should maybe try to knit again for the 15th time, which is not well, but watch the video. It looks so fine in the video.
You just put that hook through that loop.
No, but suddenly drop and gain stitches all the time, right? And so that's probably what a t-test feels like to them while I'm doing it.
Oh, yes, definitely. And you also asked about, whether I'm teaching hand calculations or coding. Mm-hmm. And so, in the years that I've been teaching, I've taught hand calculations. I've taught coding. More recently, I'm not teaching hand calculations at the same level as maybe in the past. And but there is value in teaching the hand calculations, in working through the equations, because sometimes now with, advances in computer technology and so on, some analyses, it's just one line of code, you type it in, it gives you something to interpret. But it's important that we also help the students to take a step back and go behind the scenes in the code to understand what is happening, so that they can better understand and be able to interpret what they're seeing, or to understand that what they're seeing should not be interpreted because it doesn't fit with various assumptions, or there's some errors in the data. And so if we do teach the hand calculations, it's important to connect it with why we're teaching, and not just do this, memorize this formula. Once you memorize this formula, you plug in these numbers, this is the answer. The teaching has to go beyond that. We have to go beyond just plug in these numbers. This is the formula. And instead, this is why we have that formula, and this is why it matters. And then with coding, there's different software for statistics, and the software, they're just tools that we use. And so it might be that some students are learning SPSS, other students are learning R, some might learn Python, but they all serve a specific purpose, which is, we're trying to answer certain research questions, and they all have this behind the scenes element. And so when we're teaching coding, we can also teach the, behind the scenes. This is what this code is doing. This is why. And in terms of coding, sometimes, the codes don't work, and that can be frustrating to the student. It's important for the student to know that can be frustrating to the person in general, because a lot of codes, when we're coding, we make mistakes. And so as instructors, we can show students these mistakes that we've made. If we're coding with the students, if we get a certain error, we let the students see that you got a certain error, and how did you resolve that error? And that can help the student to learn how to resolve their own errors and not get so frustrated with the coding. Sometimes it's, you have smart quotes instead of straight quotes. And when students see that it's something that's simple, and that it's something that's simple rather than their lack of understanding of the material, that can help the student, to see that, oh, I did understand this concept. I just was missing a period. That's a whole different kind of feeling that the student will have, and so it can help the student, it can empower the student to see that they do understand the material.
Well, I can't think of a better note to end on that. Just this idea that you show your mistakes and you help them learn from theirs, and that better understanding occurs. So I'm going to make myself a note about that as well, to make sure that I'm explicit about my own errors in classes. Thank you so much for your time today. It was really great to chat with you.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Today, I've been talking with Dr. Ana Blankson from Spelman College. Listeners, did today's episode make you realize you have a question you would like someone to answer? I would be happy to take it into consideration and find a guest that can help. But what I need you to do is head over to our Google form at bit.ly/AskPsychSessions.